I knew something was off when my office key didn't work. It was 7:42 a.m., the Tuesday before our annual March renewals, the busiest, most critical week of the year. I always arrived first. Always. The security guard knew me by name. The coffee cart guy on the corner had my Americano ready before I even got to the door. But that morning, the lock blinked red, and the receptionist, a temp, probably hired by someone who thought legacy was a font, gave me a practiced, tight-lipped smile and said, "Oh, Ms. Bennett, you're supposed to check in upstairs today." No one had ever told me to check in before. I walked past her anyway. Halfway down the hall, I spotted the trash can. My trash can. Clear liner, half full of a few disposable coffee cups, and one unmistakable flash of blue. My Rolodex, tossed in sideways, tabs bent, cards scattered like playing pieces from a losing hand. 5 seconds. That's how long it took to realize someone thought they'd erased me. Before I go any further, do me one favor. If you're listening and this hit you even a little, tap subscribe and like the video. 97% of people don't, and I promise it helps more than you think. Now, back to the trash. That Rolodex, it wasn't just paper. It was people, relationships, trust. It held promises I'd kept for over a decade. One card in particular, blue tab, top right corner, read, Barrett Ranch, renewal meeting confirmed. March 3rd, 4 o'clock p.m., HQ. I didn't even need to read the rest. I knew every line by heart. That's what they never understood. The young ones, the loud ones. They had dashboards and CRMs and color-coded Trello boards, sure. But they didn't have Ruth Barrett's birthday memorized or know that her oldest son, Dylan, just got engaged and wanted to relocate the cattle operation to Arizona. They didn't know what handshake deals felt like, or what it meant when someone trusted you enough to give you a call before they called their lawyer. They didn't get that trust wasn't fast. And trust, that was my domain. When I first started at Harrington and Cole, nobody paid attention to the quiet woman with the tidy desk and calloused handwriting. That was fine. I wasn't there for attention. I was there to make sure the firm's oldest, most valuable clients never had a reason to leave. I showed up when no one else did. Funerals, retirement parties, brandings. Yes, cattle brandings. You learn a lot about people when you stand next to them while they burn their legacy into an animal's hide. 14 years of doing the work no one else would, of remembering what mattered, of building something you couldn't duplicate with a LinkedIn message and a fake grin. That's why I didn't panic when I saw my Rolodex in the trash. I reached in, pulled one card, just one, and tucked it in my jacket. Then I walked to my desk, grabbed my pen, my jacket, and my phone. And I left. The thing is, I'd already seen this coming. Not clearly, not in flashing lights, but in whispers. A shift in tone, fewer invitations to the big meetings, more comments like "we're modernizing" and "it's time to scale relationship management," as if scaling trust was as easy as plugging numbers into a spreadsheet. I'd even had a meeting with HR in January. They'd asked me to outline my system for future process improvement. I smiled, handed them a laminated card with color codes and initials, and watched their eyebrows twitch. That's when I pulled my contract again. It had dust on it. I'd signed it almost a decade ago, right after landing the Barrett account. I remember the founder shaking my hand in the hallway, smiling, saying, "You saved us. You name your clause." I named it Section 11C. It said if I was terminated without cause within 45 days of my commission release date, they owed me the full payout, plus 30%. No one at HR seemed to know that clause existed, but I did. I kept that contract in a folder by my desk ever since. So when the new VP, Ethan Wallace, the founder's golden boy with a LinkedIn full of buzzwords and a jawline made for quarterly reports, walked in and told me, "You're done." I didn't argue. He didn't give a reason. He didn't need one. He'd made up his mind. Said my antique system was a liability. Said my low-tech nonsense put the firm at risk. Then he dropped my Rolodex in the bin, clapped his hands like he was sealing a damn TED Talk, and said, "This is a new era." I just smiled, because I knew something he didn't. The Barrett renewal wasn't scheduled with the firm. It was scheduled with me, personally, at 4 o'clock p.m. that same day. And Mr. Barrett, he never missed a handshake. Ethan Wallace came in like a caffeine rush with a superiority complex. tan blazer, designer sneakers, enough cologne to choke a mule. He introduced himself to the team like we were interns on the first day of orientation. Client Strategy 2.0 starts today, he'd said, as if we'd all just been aimlessly bumping into contracts and tripping over loyalty for the last decade. I watched him present a deck full of buzzwords: synergize, personalize at scale, brand intimacy metrics, while the real metrics, the quiet ones, sat on the wall behind him. Framed thank you letters, a Barrett family Christmas photo, a bolo tie from a cattle show, all addressed to me, but Ethan didn't look back once. He stopped by my office the second week, didn't knock, just leaned in and pointed at my desk. "Is that a Rolodex?" I looked up. "Yes." He stepped inside without asking, picked it up like it might bite him. "This belongs in a museum." "It works," I said, standing to take it back. "Yeah, so did carrier pigeons," he smirked. "We're gonna need to digitize your client memory. Get it all into Salesforce or Notion or whatever you're using these days." "I'm using this," I said, turning the wheel and stopping at a pink tab labeled Winters Ella Son's graduation, June 5th, prefers Merlot over Chardonnay. "And I'm not just tracking names, I'm tracking trust." "Right," he said, "but let's track it digitally now, okay?" He left before I answered. I knew what was coming, not because he was smart. He wasn't. He was ambitious. And ambition without context is like dynamite with a toddler. I'd seen his kind before. Big titles, small patience. They come in thinking we're relics, until the deals fall apart in their hands like wet paper. And so I checked my contract. The original one, not the HR-approved PDF that lived in some internal folder, but the one I'd signed with a real pen, sitting across from the founder himself after the Barrett renewal saved the quarter. There it was, right where I'd insisted. Section 11C. Termination without cause within 45 days of annual commission release shall trigger full payout of scheduled commission and contractual penalty fee of 30%. I remember his exact words when he signed it. "Hell, you earned that clause. Anyone who brings in the Barretts for 10 years deserves a parachute." I'd completely forgotten it existed, because I never thought I'd need it. But that February, when accounting emailed asking when I expected my commission to post, that's when I knew. Because they'd never asked that before. My commissions always landed like clockwork, the second Friday of March. But suddenly, someone was sniffing around the timing. And it wasn't curiosity. It was a countdown. They thought they'd beat the clock. They didn't know I said it. I printed the contract, highlighted Section 11C in yellow, paperclipped it to a packet with my last 3 commission reports, the Barrett renewal log, and my calendar entries. Then I placed it in a red folder labeled "In Case of Fire," and I waited. I kept doing my job like nothing changed, answered every call, showed up early, helped the new junior associate prep for a meeting with the Rydell family in San Antonio. I didn't let on that I saw the axe hanging, because when you build quietly for 14 years, you learn how to leave without flinching. But behind every smile, I was documenting everything. The client notes he wanted me to upload, I printed them. The birthday cards I'd sent by hand, I logged the postage, saved the originals. The digital tracking system he bragged about building in Airtable, I took screenshots of the errors it made with Ella Winter's renewal schedule, the one I'd already handled by hand flawlessly. He didn't know how close he was to stepping on a landmine. And the thing about landmines, they don't warn you. They wait. The email hit my inbox at 8:01 a.m. Subject line: Quick alignment, Conference B. No details, no agenda, just Ethan's name, and a 15-minute time slot dropped onto my calendar like a grenade. He was already waiting when I stepped into the room. Sleeves rolled, tie loose like he was prepping for a performance, not a meeting. He didn't say good morning, didn't offer coffee, didn't even nod, just stood in front of the whiteboard like he'd been practicing his smirk in the mirror for an hour straight. I sat. He didn't. "Let's not drag this out," he started, flipping open a laptop that clearly didn't have a single file of mine on it. "You've been here a long time, and I respect that, but we're pivoting." "Pivoting," I repeated, like we were a startup with a ping pong table and no clients. "Client strategies going digital, full overhaul, no more analog workflows, no more handshake memory banks. It's not scalable." He stepped over to the table, picked up my Rolodex, the one I'd brought in to review a few upcoming renewals with the junior team, and flipped it like it was a menu he didn't like the look of. Then, without a blink, he dropped it into the trash. "This isn't 1998, you're done." The silence afterward was too heavy to be real, like the whole damn building inhaled and forgot how to exhale. No HR rep, no envelope, no thank you for your service. Just a kid playing God with a smile made of LinkedIn quotes and daddy's name on the door. I didn't move at first. I just looked at the bin. Those blue, pink, and yellow tabs all twisted like a broken code. Cards I'd written with care. Ink that knew more about our clients than any CRM ever would. He waited for a reaction. I gave him silence. Then I stood up, stepped over to the trash, and without a word, pulled one card from the mess. Blue tab, Barrett Ranch. I didn't even look at him. I just tucked it in my blazer and walked out the door. No raised voice, no scene, just heels on tile and a quiet ticking in my chest that told me everything was about to shift. I passed two assistants on the way out, both trying to avoid eye contact, like I had some contagious professionalism they didn't want to catch. Down the elevator, through the lobby, I could still smell the cheap citrus cleaner they used to cover up how cold the place had gotten since the founder stopped coming in every day. The moment I stepped outside, the wind caught my coat like it was in on the joke. I stood there for a second, under the overhang, staring at the building I'd given 14 years of my life to. Ethan thought he'd just streamlined a process. What he'd done was amputate the one limb that kept the blood pumping through half the firm's legacy accounts. Barrett Ranch wasn't just a client. They were the client. $2.7 billion valuation, 6 regional expansions in the last decade, all shepherded by a trust that operated on nothing but personal bonds and historical loyalty. I'd been the one to win them over when their old firm blew a confidentiality clause. I'd been the one Ruth Barrett called when her father passed, asking if I'd still be handling things because consistency mattered more now than ever. But Ethan hadn't asked about any of that, because Ethan didn't know. He didn't know their renewal was scheduled for that afternoon. He didn't know I'd been their sole point of contact for over a decade. He didn't know that the calendar invite, the one booked months in advance, was addressed to me personally. What he knew was how to throw away something that didn't flash. I hailed a cab and opened my phone. One email to my attorney. Subject, Section 11C, Initiation. No exclamation points, no emojis, no threats, just facts, dates, clauses. I'd waited a long time to build something no one could take from me with a 5-minute tantrum. And now? Now they were going to learn what it cost to throw away trust like it was clutter. By 1:12 p.m., their legal department's inbox lit up like a Christmas tree doused in kerosene. Subject, Section 11C, Notice of Termination. Sender, my attorney, Harold Linney, 72, retired twice, lives in Boca Raton, still eats General Counsel for breakfast. Attached, a tidy 6-document package, my original employment contract initialed on every page and signed in ink by the founder, back when documents meant something. Then, my commission schedules from the last 6 years, highlighting the regular payout pattern every March 10th. Next, calendar exports showing the Barrett renewal timeline, including the 4 p.m. lobby meeting Ethan had just bulldozed through like a blindfolded bull in a trust fund china shop. Finally, internal email threads with accounting confirming March 10th as the release date for this year's commissions. The termination date, March 3rd. 7 days off. That clause Ethan never read? It didn't just bite, it detonated. Section 11C was clear as glass. Termination without cause within 45 days prior to commission release triggered a full payout of the commission, plus a 30% penalty due immediately upon breach. It had been drafted by the founder himself, back when I landed the Barrett Ranch account and prevented a $14 million quarterly shortfall that almost sunk their second fund. I remember the meeting like it was yesterday. The founder looked across the desk, slid a whiskey glass toward me, 4 p.m., no ice, no judgment, and said, "You saved our ass. What clause do you want?" I didn't blink. I want protection. I want to make sure if someone ever comes in here and decides I'm outdated, you still owe me what I earned. He smiled, scribbled 11C into the margin, and had the GC codify it that afternoon. Now, over a decade later, his son had stomped in, trashed my Rolodex, and activated the nuclear option without even knowing it. I imagine legal didn't have a lunch that day. They likely pored over my file, expecting some dusty HR boilerplate. Instead, they found a time bomb with the founder's signature sitting on top of it in blue ink. By 2:00 p.m., internal messages were flying. I know, because one of the assistants, bless her heart, sent me a text that just said, "They're freaking out." Ethan didn't know what hit him. He probably assumed this was going to be one of those clean sweeps. Out with the old, in with the shiny, but you don't just toss a legacy asset out the window and expect the foundation to hold. And the best part? They couldn't undo it. There was no oops clause, no grace period. My attorney had timed it perfectly, and Ethan, in his rush to declare a new era, hadn't even bothered to wait a week. The firm now owed me north of $1.4 million in commission, plus the $420,000 penalty triggered by 11C. All enforceable, all immediate, all avoidable. If someone had just asked me, or hell, read the damn contract. But they didn't. Because Ethan didn't think people like me kept records. He thought wisdom came with dashboards and brand guides. He thought loyalty was just a buzzword for people too slow to adapt. And most of all, he thought my silence meant I didn't have leverage. I've never had to shout to win. I just wait for the right clause to do the talking. By 3:00 p.m., the firm's outside counsel was looped in. Harold had already replied. One sentence. Per Section 11C, payout is expected in full no later than March 7th to avoid escalated breach remedies under paragraph 14E. I can only imagine Ethan's face when someone explained that to him. The man who fired me without blinking had just cost the firm nearly $2 million and hadn't even cleared it with HR. And while they scrambled to put out the fire, the real explosion hadn't even hit yet, because at 4:00 p.m., Mr. Barrett was walking through those doors. And he wasn't there for them. He was there for me. It started with a whisper. Someone on the legal floor asking, "Who approved this clause?" Then came the stampede. Interns running paper files back and forth like it was 1993. Paralegals combing through archive boxes they didn't even know existed. Glass doors slamming, phones vibrating nonstop. By 3:20 p.m., every corner of Harrington and Cole's legal and compliance departments had been mobilized like a bomb squad trying to find the ticking before it blew. They pulled every employment agreement from the last 15 years. Dozens of contracts. All clean, standard, neutered language. Not a single one carried anything close to Section 11C. Most employees didn't even realize such clauses were allowed. But mine was original. Ink signed. Founder issued. Witnessed by the former general counsel herself, whose name now sat on a glossy alumni plaque by the elevators. They scanned, rescanned, OCR'd, and cross-checked it 6 ways from Sunday, hoping to find a catch, a loophole, a conflicting clause buried somewhere. There wasn't one. It wasn't boilerplate. It was bespoke. Because I didn't get my role from a recruiter, I earned it. One cattle ranch, one oil family, one handshake at a time. That contract? It wasn't a favor. It was a receipt. And Ethan? He'd never even looked at it. Worse, he'd never asked anyone about legacy contracts. His assumption was that tenure meant stagnation, not value. He thought anyone over 40 had already been digitized or pushed out. HR confirmed it in hushed tones. There'd been no review, no transition. He'd walked in on day 1 and played emperor with a loaded revolver he didn't know was cocked. Now the chamber had spun, and it landed squarely on his foot. By mid-afternoon, the exposure had ballooned to $2.4 million. The 1.4M commission, the 30% penalty, plus additional damages if they couldn't fulfill the terms within the contract window. Harold had already filed a preservation notice, meaning every document, timestamp, and Slack message related to my termination was now legally locked in place. No edits, no retractions, no oops, let's fix it. But here's where it got fun. The firm's core value proposition had always been legacy continuity. Family-owned wealth deserves family-style loyalty. It was their tagline. Plastered on brochures, etched into donor plaques, even spoken aloud at charity galas where the founder used to wax poetic about the soul of client relations. That tagline? It was written by me. Now that soul had just been fired over a Rolodex. And the dominoes weren't done falling. Because the Barrett Ranch wasn't just a marquee client. They were a linchpin. Their continued partnership validated the firm's entire Western portfolio. We'd use their name, with permission, to pitch 4 other multi-million-dollar families in Texas, Montana, and Wyoming. Clients who followed Barrett's lead, trusted their instincts, and mirrored their financial behavior. If Barrett walked, so would the rest. That's when someone in business development found the old CRM notes from 5 years ago. Client profile, Barrett Ranch Holdings Preferred Rep. D. Bennett Account Rule, Relationship Exclusive. Client requires continuity with existing handler or will exit. There it was, in plain text, dated, time-stamped, updated annually. The renewal notes were clear as day. Client has zero tolerance for rotation of representation without prior discussion. And now, thanks to Ethan, there'd been no discussion, just a trash can and a declaration. By 3:41 p.m., I'm told someone in finance asked, "Is there any way to claw this back?" The answer was no, but worse than no was the clock, because the Barrett renewal meeting, it was still scheduled in 19 minutes. And for the first time in Harrington and Cole's 100-year history, no one in that building knew who would be sitting across from $2.7 billion in generational wealth. And that was the beginning of the real damage. At 3:46 p.m., a junior assistant named Lila, barely 6 weeks into her contract and still terrified of replying all, hesitated over a blinking reminder on her screen. She thought it was a mistake. The invite looked old, but the name on it was clear. Subject, Barrett Renewal, Lobby Meeting, time 4 p.m. Location, Harrington and Cole HQ, attendee D. Bennett, primary. Notes, Ruth bringing updated charter, Dylan confirmed. Signatures expected. She hovered her mouse over the forward button for a full 10 seconds before deciding to escalate. She sent it to her manager with a cautious note. Not sure who should take this. It's still on Ms. Bennett's calendar and Mr. Barrett is en route. The email lit a fuse because up until that moment, no one had connected the dots between my termination and the firm's most important deal of the year. They'd been so wrapped up in Claw's panic, legal scrambling, and Ethan's increasingly unhinged attempts to get ahead of the narrative that they hadn't checked the day's actual calendar. Now there were 14 minutes left until a man worth nearly $3 billion walked through their front doors, expecting to sit down with me, and no one had an answer. The founder's former executive assistant, Martha, who had quietly retired 2 years ago but still had access to old files, was called in to verify the renewal logistics. She didn't say much. She just opened her email archive, scrolled to a thread from 6 months earlier, and read aloud. Per Dylan Barrett, renewal must be handled by Deborah. Ranch won't proceed with firm if new personnel are assigned without consent. Meeting confirmed March 3rd, 4 p.m., HQ lobby. Then she looked up and said, flatly, "They won't sign if she's not there." That's when someone finally paged Ethan. He was in the boardroom trying to pitch a client continuity transition strategy, essentially a buzzword salad with no croutons, when a compliance officer pulled him aside and said, "We have a situation." Ethan laughed, until he saw the calendar, until he saw the attached file with my name as the sole point of contact, until he realized the Barretts had never once interfaced with anyone else at Harrington and Cole, not since the original trust onboarding 12 years earlier. No backup, no secondary, no wiggle room. And the renewal? It wasn't just a routine continuation. It was the formal signing of a 10-year custodial oversight agreement with a new expansion clause, a deal that would lock $380 million in long-term assets under Harrington and Cole's care, or at least that would have, if the right person had been in the lobby. At 3:54 p.m., the receptionist received a call from the parking garage. Mr. Barrett's SUV just pulled in. Everyone froze. Ethan's eyes darted to legal. Legal looked at HR. HR looked at the floor. One voice, someone from portfolio ops, I'm told, whispered, "We could ask her to come back." But they knew. They all knew. Because this meeting wasn't a formality, it wasn't a champagne toast, it wasn't a photo op to post on LinkedIn with the caption, "Legacy renewed." It was the deal. And I wasn't there, not because I was late, but because I'd been fired. Publicly, arrogantly, without review. There would be no quick fix, no recovery, no pivot. The Barretts hadn't scheduled that meeting with Harrington and Cole. They scheduled it with me. And now, with 5 minutes left on the clock, the firm that prided itself on legacy trust was about to be reminded what happens when you throw away the person holding the keys to it. The lobby clock ticked louder than it had all year. At 4:02 p.m. sharp, the double doors swung open with the kind of quiet weight only old money knows how to carry. Mr. Barrett walked in with his usual unhurried stride, boots polished to a muted gleam, coat folded neatly over one arm, hat in the other. Not flashy. Just composed, like a man who's made decisions that shaped counties, a man who doesn't mistake noise for power. Behind him, his son Dylan followed, taller, leaner, in a newer suit, but with the same narrowed eyes and handshake-tempered calm. They didn't pause, didn't check in, didn't ask for directions, because they knew where to go, and they knew who they were meeting. Me. I was already in the lobby, not by design, just instinct. I hadn't planned to be standing there when they walked in, but something in my spine told me not to leave just yet. When Mr. Barrett saw me, his face lit up the way it always did. Not with warmth exactly, but with recognition. Trust. Like a man who'd found the one familiar landmark in a storm. He stepped right up to me, extended his hand, and said, "Ready?" I took his hand gently and said, "I was terminated this morning. No theatrics, no smile. Just the truth, placed between us like a loaded revolver on a poker table." He paused mid-shake, held my eyes for a beat, and then slowly turned his head toward the elevator, where Ethan stood, half hiding behind a clipboard he wasn't holding 5 seconds earlier. Mr. Barrett didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply asked, "Did you fire her?" Ethan tried to step forward. "There's been a misunderstanding. We're in a period of transition and—" "That a yes?" Barrett cut in. Calm, final. Ethan froze. Dylan crossed his arms, said nothing. Mr. Barrett took a breath like he was trying not to let his disgust fog up the glass walls. Then he looked back at me. "How long were we on your calendar for today?" 6 months, I replied. "Since the July trust review." "And who initiated this meeting?" "You did, after you approved the new custodial charter." He nodded once, then turned fully to Ethan, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air like a whip. "You just canceled your own contract." Ethan blinked. What? Sir, that's not how—" But Mr. Barrett was already turning, to the receptionist. "No need to validate our parking." To Dylan. "We're leaving." To me. "Deborah, I'll call you tomorrow. Let's talk about how we do this directly now." He nodded, and just like that, he walked out. The $2.7 billion man, the patriarch, the domino. Dylan followed, but not before pausing next to Ethan, looking him square in the eyes and saying flatly, "She's the only reason we stayed after the transition 3 years ago. My father doesn't replace people. He replaces firms." Then he walked. The lobby was dead silent. Ethan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. A security guard cleared his throat. And I just stood there for a moment longer. Then I adjusted my coat, pulled the Barrett card from my blazer pocket, smoothed its edge with one thumb, and walked out through the same doors Mr. Barrett had just cleared. The wind was cold. But not as cold as the silence behind me. The firm liked to think of itself as unshakable, legacy-branded, ironclad, the kind of place where bad press simply didn't stick because it never came close enough to touch. But by 7:12 p.m. that night, the first crack turned into a canyon. An email hit the inboxes of the executive team, not addressed to any one person in particular, just a simple, chilling line from Barrett Holdings. Subject: Partnership Review. Message: in light of today's events, we'll be reassessing all active partnerships and pending renewals. Please do not initiate further outreach until contacted. No signature, no room for misinterpretation. The kind of corporate death knell that doesn't scream, it just shuts the door with a click. Inside the firm, it was full panic mode. The PR team scrambled to draft talking points that never made it past legal. Compliance issued a soft gag order, worried someone might say the wrong thing to the wrong outlet, or worse, to one of the firm's other legacy clients. Because Barrett walking away wasn't a ripple, it was a signal, and everyone knew it. The founder, Wallace Sr., hadn't been seen in the building in almost 9 months. Since stepping back, he'd taken up full-time residence in Napa, left most operations to Ethan, and was rumored to be transitioning to a purely advisory role. But at 6:34 the next morning, his black town car pulled up outside the building. He walked in wearing the same gray trench coat he'd worn the day he hired me. No assistant, no entourage, just a look on his face like someone had burned down his family's barn. He didn't go to his old office. He went straight to Conference A. Ethan was already inside with 2 board members, mid-spin, blaming process gaps, onboarding misalignment, and something about generational system friction. Didn't matter. Wallace Sr. stood there in silence for a full 10 seconds, then finally asked, "You fired her without reading her contract?" Nobody answered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask again. He just looked at his son like he was seeing him for the first time, and didn't particularly care for the view. Then he turned to the board members and said, "Pull every retention clause from every contract dated before 2016. Full audit by noon. Legal to report directly to me." He walked out. No one followed. By 10 a.m., I'd received a wire confirmation. Full commission, penalty included, processed and cleared. By noon, 3 more clients had paused active projects, citing sudden staffing inconsistencies and a breakdown in trust. One even copied a phrase straight from Barrett's email: "We're reassessing." Ethan didn't speak in the next leadership call. He wasn't invited to the one after that, and by the end of the week, his name disappeared from the leadership page, quietly, without announcement. But the damage was done. Not just to the firm's financials, those would recover, eventually. No, the real damage was to something older, deeper: reputation. For a company like Harrington & Cole, legacy wasn't just a selling point. It was the product. Their entire value was built on one belief, that no matter what happened in the world, they could be trusted to remain steady, discreet, loyal, and now they'd fired loyalty. They'd thrown discretion in the trash, and they'd tried to modernize trust by replacing it with tech decks and metrics. The market noticed. So did the clients. So did the whispers. And none of them forgot. By Friday morning, it was done. I checked my account at 6:07 a.m., same time I always used to walk into the office before the others arrived. The deposit had cleared overnight. Full commission, plus 30%. No memo line, no apology, just numbers, clinical and unfeeling, like they hoped money would buy the silence they didn't have the backbone to ask for directly. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. I already had a lease signed for a small space across the street. Corner office, 3rd floor. No view to brag about, but it caught the afternoon light just right, and I could see the Harrington & Cole building clear as day through the front window. Not that I planned on staring. Just felt poetic somehow. The furniture was delivered by noon, a desk that didn't creak, a chair that didn't pretend lumbar support was a myth, a fresh coat of warm beige on the walls like a held breath after the storm. I didn't bring much with me, just a coffee mug, a photograph of my mother, and one card, blue tab from the old Rolodex, still creased at the corner from where I'd rescued it out of the trash. Barrett Ranch, March 3rd, renewal complete. At 3:12 p.m., the phone rang. Landline. I'd insisted on one. It was Mr. Barrett. "Deborah," he said, "we're not interested in rebuilding the relationship with the firm." "I figured," I said, "but we'd like to work directly with you going forward. I've got 2 other families who are looking for the kind of work you do, the kind that doesn't come in a brochure." I smiled. I'd be honored. He paused. "You didn't say a word back there, in the lobby." "I didn't have to." He chuckled. Hell of a thing, letting the silence speak. After we hung up, I sat there for a minute, watching the city move like it always had. Fast, full of people who thought noise equaled direction. Then I reached down, opened a fresh drawer, and pulled out a brand new Rolodex. Same style, same size, same tabs. Blue, pink, yellow, green, just like the one they threw out. People will tell you those things are obsolete. That real power comes with dashboards and digital reports and apps that ping your wrist. But they're wrong. Real power remembers. Real power doesn't shout. It waits. I slid in the first card. Name: Barrett, Ruth, and Dylan. Details: transition to independent management. Note: prefers calm. Trust earned, not assumed. On the next card, I wrote something just for me. A reminder, a promise, an epitaph for the past, and a compass for what comes next. Experience doesn't shout, it waits. And this time, it was waiting on my terms.